been looking at Acts here, and we've gotten up to basically chapters 4 and 5, which are punctuated, as we said, by a certain amount of narrational glue. Every time a certain episode occurs, it's followed by, and a certain number of people were added to the church after that. So each episode begins and ends with that, but the presentation of the first 4 or 5 chapters of Acts has to do really with debates on the temple steps and the apostles, or the inner 3 or inner 2, whoever seems to be being portrayed here.
It's the wrong class?
Is that the wrong one? Let's get a different one. Is that 312? So we'll go, I thought it said 376.
That is. Yeah, 312.
Oh, okay. Here's 376. Okay, pass this one around. Put the date on that one. Thanks. Okay, so basically the atmosphere, aside from the miraculous things, beggars leaping, paralytics cured, all that sort of thing that would look good in a Monty Python movie. What really is occurring here is debates or confrontations, discussions on the temple steps, in the temple, which is basically what the approach of the Pseudo-Clementine recognitions is. So to my mind, these two documents are fairly parallel. The point of view is totally the opposite, one and the other. Since you don't necessarily have the Pseudo-Clementine recognitions, if you don't have that collection of materials I had in that blue collection folio, then you won't see it, but you'll have to take my word for it that that's the way it is. For instance, we have this holding back materials, and line 436 or 435, before Barnabas is introduced, laying them at the feet of the apostles, their valuables, and giving them out to everyone as needed. I mean, later on we're going to have Stephen's clothes laid at the feet of a man called Saul. These presentations are fairly repetitive in terms of how the authors are presenting them. Do I think the authors know anything about the situation in Palestine in this period when writing this material? No, I don't. I think they know very little, if nothing. They have a few notices they've gotten from some other sources and are reconstructing their picture of Palestinian history like this, but I think it's, compared to Josephus, it's like the writings of a child compared to not a very nice person, Josephus, but at least a serious attempt at history. And this is certainly not an accurate, serious attempt to portray the historical situation in Palestine in the 40s or late 30s. Anyway, it's mostly about miracles and things of that kind. So this one woman falls down at his feet and immediately dies, line 10. I've been working on this falling at the feet image that we're getting in a lot of these documents. Laying the clothes at the feet, falling down at the feet. Throughout the Gospels, Mary and Martha are always falling at Jesus' feet, wiping his feet with their hair, kissing his feet lovingly. There's an awful lot of this kind of imagery throughout these documents. I don't know what you want to make of it all, but I don't want to give anything away from my present work, but particularly as Ron is sitting here, because anything I say he's likely to run off with, and the next thing I know he'll be he'll be marketing it someplace. I got to be careful with him around with his wide absorptive abilities. But since I haven't published any of this material yet, so I won't give you what the origin I think this material is. Any case, when you get repetitive elements of that kind over and over again, I'm not sure you want to credit them historically. It has to do with a literary element, I think. But I'm one of the few people who says that, so you don't want to take me as the final word. It's just my own prejudiced view. But a prejudice based on repeatedly encountering these usages. And a great fear came on all those, line 11 of chapter 5 here. And many miracles and wonders were worked among the people by the hands of the apostles. The apostles are running around doing all these things everywhere. You know, this is not history. I know it's nice for faith and it's very inspiring for those who are looking for spiritual reinforcement. But if you're interested in a picture of what's going on, I don't think that this is... it would be like me saying, and all the people around George Bush were doing many miracles and wonders in Texas at the time of his elevation to the presidency, and Karl Rove and his companions were doing many works and mighty miracles among the people. That would be one way of expressing it. Of course, we laugh to ourselves if I would say it about the Bush entourage or someone, or the Kerry entourage or whatever, but that's a similar thing. Or you say, no, it's not similar. These people had superpowers. Well, I don't think you'll find anyone in the universe who has superpowers. You say, well, that's why I'm a Christian, because I believe there are people in the universe with superpowers. Well, okay, that's your belief, but that is just a belief. And it's okay in a church, synagogue, mosque, but it won't hold up in the physics department of this university, which may or may not be the final arbiter. You'll have to decide that. But since we're in this university, we have to go according to their standards. And they were all together on the porch of Solomon. Okay, I think there's an historical notice. That they met on the temple pretty regularly. And the more believers were added to the Lord, myriads of both men and women. So that's the glue I told you about, line 14. Myriads of people. Each episode is punctuated. So if you want to look at these first 5 chapters, I think you'll find lines about 5 or 6 notices of that kind. And crowds came together from the cities around Jerusalem, bringing sick ones and people with evil spirits, and all were healed. Again, I don't think this is being written by an eyewitness. You say, well, no, it's supposed to. This is an eyewitness. Yeah, that's the issue here. And me and Mel Gibson will part company on this one, I guess. And the saint in Germany, the 19th century saint whose visions he claims to have based some of his cinematic portrayals upon. This is, to my mind, the problem that we're dealing with when we're trying to get an accurate picture of what's going on in the early development of these ideas. I don't know, I have an answer. Because long after you and I have passed, this material will remain, and it will be all over again presented to a new generation of new minds who have just come into existence themselves and are becoming mature. So the whole issue starts over again. And the problem is that literature is an enduring thing, and that's what people don't really realize, how powerful literature is. So if you want to have influence over masses, a group of people, or the world, write great literature, and then you will surely achieve your goals. Because great literature remains. We are still talking about Jack Kerouac and people like that, even though I don't think it's very great, and they'll be talked about for 100, 200 more years, and you and I will just pass into dust. And these people are, to my mind, almost worthless anyway, people like him, but whatever he managed to produce on this piece of paper remains. That's the power of literature. I'll give you another example, Philip Roth. Every book he manages to produce, he's got one on the selling this now becomes instantly read by myriads of people as if it's an accurate picture, and it's all totally inaccurate, stupid stuff. And yet, 100 years from now, they'll still be judging our generation on things of that kind. And so this is how we're judging this first century on material of this kind. I wish you could have been there and seen what really happened. That's all I can tell you. I don't know what really happened, but I don't think this is what happened. Crowds came together. If there's so many crowds coming together, then of course there'd be no problem in the popularity of this movement, and they wouldn't be having any trouble at all. I think they were a popular movement, but I don't think it's because of this presentation. Anyway, the high priest, who was from the Sadducees, because the author of this is read as Josephus, line 17, seized the apostles and put them in prison. I'm not sure the high priest had that power to do that. There's a Roman governor here at this time. And the angel of the Lord opened the prison gates. We've heard that when Peter escapes from prison. We'll hear it again. But this is another repetition of the Peter material that will occur later on. And the angel opens things. Again, if I told you that I was arrested by the Long Beach police for drunk driving, but an angel of the Lord came and opened the prison gates for me, you would look at me in a very odd way, and you would think I was ready for the loony bin. And you would really avoid me like the plague if I spoke to you like this now. And that's another point I'm trying to make, that we accept in the past behavior and characterizations that if someone made a claim in the present, we would be horrified. Again, it's literature, the power of what literature is. So, oh yes, and then you'll meet someone who takes material of these kinds of things, whatever religion they may be, Judaism, Christianity, Muslim, or Buddhist, seriously, and they'll say, oh yes, well, the early apostles were arrested and an angel freed them. And they'll just talk about that like it's normal. Like that really happened. It took me until I was about 40 to realize, to have the courage and the strength of mind to stand up and say, no, this is literature. Because I really believe these things myself, I have to say, because everyone else was believing them. So I said, being a young person coming into this world, who am I? I'm just a little jerk. Why should I stand against what eons and generations of people have accepted as factual account? But this distorts people's minds because they think this actually exists in the real world, and therefore they are either awed by it or going around expecting something like this to happen in their life, and it never does. Again, if one of you gets into prison and an angel of the Lord releases you, please let me know, will you? And I say if it didn't happen in the present, it didn't happen in the past. And I know that's hard for people today. People get angry when you say that. If it didn't happen in the present, it didn't happen in the past. And so when it happens today, I will credit it happening yesterday. Okay? So let me know when it does. And then we'll put this material in the historical hopper, not in the literature hopper. Go stand in the temple, stand. There's the standing illusion again, 20. And preach to the people. My translation may differ a bit from yours. And so they all went to the temple at dawn and were teaching. Pseudo-Clementine recognition. They got up at dawn and prayed. The homilies too. Peter got up every morning before dawn. The Essenes get up every morning before dawn. To my mind, that is, again, what is triggering this presentation, altered by the writers who are representing it in their own way. So, again, you can always find things like this, and once you're looking for it, you'll find a lot of these things. So the Sanhedrin got together, and all the Senate, as if the Sanhedrin is interested in such a thing. I mean, what, you know what it means to call 70 people together from all over the country, and the transportation and communications of that time? I mean, it's just staggering. So, it was so easy to get the Sanhedrin, and then what, to consider because some people are up in the temple preaching something and making some claims about miracle working or healing a few people? No. Sanhedrin hasn't got time for that kind of thing, and wouldn't even be worried about it if it were happening. The only people who would be worrying about it would be Roman governors. Anyway, so, it's because they escaped from prison the Sanhedrin is supposedly meeting. Just frightening stuff to me. Again, you'd have to be reading Josephus to get a better picture perhaps of what. But this is more or less what happens with the Peter episode later on, when Peter escapes from prison because an angel helps him. And then a little more realistic, the Herodian governor or ruler then executes the jailers for having let him go. That sounds a little more realistic than this. But on the other hand, you can read between this if you think this is what happened and say, oh, well, the jailers were sympathetic to them and let them out. That's possible. And in any case, I didn't know that the Sanhedrin kept prisons. Anyway, there they are again, 25, standing and teaching. It's always standing and teaching. The standing one, that famous doctrine that I've tried to tell you about, that is part of the Pseudo-Clementine basic doctrines. The Messiah is the standing one. And now the captain feared they may get stoned by the crowds. Who's going to get stoned by the crowds? The captain and his officers? Or the apostles are going to get stoned by the crowds? I guess it's supposed to be the apostles are going to get stoned by the crowds. But why would the apostles get stoned by the crowds if they're so popular? If there's all these myriads of people? Anyway, no one analyzed this the way I have, unfortunately. And I think for 2,000 years, most people have never stopped to analyze this carefully. People, because they approach this from a faith-based, if you like, orientation. Josephus does have a picture of the crowds stoning each other in this period from the 40s to the 60s. Different party groups on the Temple Mount throwing stones at each other. Different political orientations. Isn't one group being totally overwhelmed by the other, but two groups fighting each other, the high priest group and the Revolutionary Party group. And I think that's what this is based on again. Right out of the Antiquities, again, the stoning of different groups of each other. But it isn't that they're going to be stoned as an execution. They're throwing stones at each other because they're opposite political parties. Okay? Again, I've never had time to put this in a book, this analysis, because I don't know how I could do it. The person would have to have the text in front of them in order to critique the text. And you can't depend on a writer having the text, a reader having the text in front of them in order to explain to them what the issue is. So it's almost impossible to do this except orally in a classroom, which is why I'm putting it on film. Because that's the only way you can actually expound these things. Anyway, they brought them to the Sanhedrin, and the high priest is getting angry again. Do not teach in this name. The name is very important symbolism in all these documents, in the book of Acts, in the Pseudo-Clementines, in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The name, teaching in this name, called by this name. Again, it's a constant theme. I just call it to your attention. Your teaching, you will bring on us the blood of this man. Again, another allusion to the blood libel. How is their teaching going to bring on them the blood of this man? Are they teaching the blood libel accusation against the Jewish people? Do the priests represent the Jewish people? How come if the priests supposedly represent the Jewish people, do the people kill all the high priests when they have the uprising in 66? So, I mean, who's us? It's interpreted the whole Jewish people as if these priests are legitimate representatives of the Jewish people. They're not. They're Herodian Roman priests who have been appointed by an occupying power that the people rise up against and kill them all just 15 years after or 20 years afterwards. So again, these things are, the writers of the book of Acts are totally unaware of and don't care about. You fill Jerusalem with your teaching and intend to bring the blood of this man on us. Oh, so Peter gets up for speech number 4, is it, or 5? Blood libel accusation. You should obey God rather than men. The God of your fathers or our fathers raised up Jesus, whom you killed by crucifixion. There it is. I don't think Peter ever speaks, but he doesn't make the blood libel accusation. Now, no Christian has ever stopped to think about this, nor has any Jew that I'm aware of. Certainly no Muslim. But you're now familiar with this, and I've illustrated it, haven't I, over and over again. This is all Peter ever says. And as we've said in the last class, it's the very thing Jews were forbidden to do, crucify people. So someone filled with hatred of Jews has written this material. I hate to say that. I'm very sad about that. I don't want to hurt any Christians' feelings. I know they have the most decent, they care very much. They are the most deeply feeling people that I know. They mean no harm to anyone, most people, but they are just unaware that someone has written material of this kind full of hatred for Jews, not for anyone else. It doesn't hate Eskimos, and it's not hating Aborigines. Certainly not hating American Indians, blacks, or anyone else. It's just full of hatred of Jews. And therefore, the hatred of Jews in the Western world is totally not surprising. And nobody will come to grips with it. Nobody ever will. The whole Middle East situation is still revolving around it. It's all so sad, and our own time, what we've gone through with the killing of 1 million children in gas chambers is so frightening. And you say, what's the reason for it? There must be something wrong with the Jews. No, something wrong with people who have been infected with this with this kind of thinking. And it's not their fault, and it's not Peter's fault, because I'm sure Peter never said one word like this. I know he didn't, from the bottom of my soul. And I know whatever Mel Gibson has to say in his reaffirmation of this kind of thing, these things did not happen in this way. It's very sad. But having heard they were cut to the heart and plotted to put them to death. So the crowd wants to kill the Christians again. So it's either the Jews persecuting Christ or the Jews persecuting the Christians, when the Christians are supposed to be the popular people among the crowd, as we just saw. And who's plotting then? The crowd? Or it's impossible to follow this narrative. There's no sensitivity to the different groups of people, the lower classes, the upper classes, the occupying powers, and so on. And a certain Pharisee named Gamaliel, thank God finally we get to Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, honored by the people, rose up in the Sanhedrin and commanded the apostles to be put out for a short while. And he says to the people in the Sanhedrin, look, men, Israelites. This again parallels the Pseudo-Clementines. As we know in the recognitions, as I read to you last time, Gamaliel is a secret Christian, supposedly in the, I don't know if that's true either, in the recognitions, but the narratives are paralleling each other again in the mention. Both, the only Jew they know of by name basically is Gamaliel. And the only reason they know Gamaliel is why? Because Paul mentions him in his letters as being one of his teachers. That's the only reason they know of him, and so he comes into the narrative protecting Christians to some extent, or at least telling Israelites to be careful not to harm these people. And of course, what's wrong with the speech that he supposedly delivers? Well, the problem with the speech that he supposedly delivers is that there was no one with a tape recorder there at that time. And therefore, the speech he delivers is complete with the anachronism that we have previously pointed out. What's the anachronism? What's meant by an anachronism? When you have things chronologically out of whack. Now, the average person, if I go to Bulgaria and go into a church in Bulgaria and say, did you know that Gamaliel's speech in the book of Acts is chronologically inaccurate? They would look at me like I was from outer space. The average person who's involved in the practice of these matters is not interested that Gamaliel's speech is inaccurate and in fact is totally out of whack. And it's been lifted from someplace that we can tell you what the source is. But they should be, because they consider this material God-given. And, you know, if God gave these materials, then God is actually not giving them accurate materials. And it undermines the whole situation, unfortunately. And in fact, I would do, by the way, the same to rabbinic literature. Don't think I would just be hard on this literature. If I took the Talmud, I would do the same thing to it. I'd rip it to shreds. So you don't have to feel that I'm partial. If I do, Ron knows I do the same thing with the Koran.
Oh, yeah.
So it isn't that I just want accurate material. I don't care what the religion or present. The reason I don't rip Josephus too much, although I do, is that sometimes his material is quasi-accurate. In other words, we can see through the distortions of his material. But at least he's operating from a certain historical base. But when it's not even quasi-accurate, then in fact you want to point that out. And you're not going to make people happy by doing that, because the general message, the general approach of the world is to shoot the messenger, as you know. The messenger of bad tidings, yeah.
How much should we attribute to ancient historical, the way ancient history was written? I mean, how much does that play?
Well, this is, well, let's look at this in accuracy. This is not attributable or anything like that. This is just attributable to superficial reading of another source and just slapping it in here. This is just slapdash, poor editing, and really not even concerned. And part of the fictionalization of what we're having here. They don't have any idea if Gamaliel made a speech. They don't know what Gamaliel might have said. They don't even know if Gamaliel did this, but the narrative has demanded Gamaliel appear here, so something is put into his mouth. That is part of ancient historical writing, that you just put a speech in someone's mouth. Thucydides started that, and when he started inventing all the speeches that his heroes gave. So maybe Gamaliel did stand up at this point, I don't know, but it doesn't parallel what we have in the Pseudo-Clementines, and I don't honestly think, that the people in the 40s in Jerusalem were so worried about this community. It doesn't come through in Josephus that this is a serious issue that's bothering the people. The main thing that's bothering the people in the 40s is the severity of the Roman occupation, things like the famine, the fact that people are fleeing the Roman soldiers being brutal with the population, and Josephus is pro-Roman, he's still presenting this. The disputes between people on the coast, Greco-Hellenistic Roman citizens on the coast, the coastal cities, and Jews inland, the riots they're having together, the arguments between Jews and Samaritans, rioting down by this place called Lydda, executions that occur there from Roman prosecutors who crucified people who were involved in this rioting, a Roman centurion in the temple pulling his pants down and pulling out his sexual organ in the middle of the Jewish festival of Passover and exposing himself, and then turning around and blowing a fart at the masses, which creates a riot in the temple and a stampede. Now, you say, do you accept that? Yeah, I do, because I think, in fact, that is the horrible stuff you'd read in the Long Beach Daily Telegraph or something like that. That's what was going on. This is not what was going on in this period. And then, of course, the people in the countryside beating everyone in sight after that occurred because of the riot that ensued, and 300 people were trampled to death, like you get in Mecca. And Josephus has that in both of his books. So again, this, whether Gamaliel ever gave the speech, I have no idea. But it's a common element in the Pseudo-Clementines. But let's look at the speech here, and then we can see where he got it from. For in those days, Theudas rose up, boasting he was somebody, and a number of men were joined to him, and he was killed, and all of them got scattered and came to nothing, as many was following. And after this, Judas the Galilean rose, in the days of the census and drew many people after him. So the person is trying to look like he knows something about Palestinian history here. What's the problem here? No. Judas the Galilean, this is an event in the time of Jesus' birth. The census 7 AD comes about 35 years before Theudas, not after him. And, the person just quickly read Josephus and chucked this stuff in here. But you can understand where he got it from, because Josephus, when he is talking about this period, and when he is talking about Theudas, is talking about the famine, is talking about difficulties, it's in the Antiquities. And he does mention Judas the Galilean, because right after the coming of Theudas, he says, and after Theudas, and he doesn't just talk like this, he was somebody, and he actually describes the episode in detail. This is like someone who's read Josephus and just sort of like telling someone about it 6 months later or a year later from basically what he remembers, very poorly remembered and digested, but knows something. But when Josephus does talk about Theudas, he then talks after that, which is around 45 AD or so. In 48 AD, the two sons of Judas the Galilean were executed by the Roman authorities because as a preventive crucifixion, because they were afraid they were going to lead and cause more uprising and more disturbances. And then Josephus says that Judas the Galilean, that was that rose up in the time of the census of Cyrenius and was and so on. In order to describe who Judas the Galilean was at that point, when his two sons are being executed, that the Gospels don't bother telling us about, Josephus mentions the census and who the father was. That's where they get the sequence from. Now, you follow? I don't know if you follow what I'm saying here. So the point is that you can, with little insight, identify where this is from and how the writer is operating from his sources. Since this is totally wrong, and we know it's wrong, then you can see, so you say, well, so how come it's wrong? Well, we know the source, basically, from looking at the sequencing here. The sequencing is like this in the source, only he's left out something, the two sons. It's the two sons of Judas the Galilean who was executed or who rose up in the time of the census, who came after this. Of course, this wouldn't fit either into the sequence. Why? Because that's 48 AD, and this is not supposed to be 48 AD, this is supposed to be in the 30s here. Right, Ron?
Right.
Yeah, it's totally out of whack. I mean, it's totally out of whack. If I put this into a courtroom, this would be thrown out immediately tomorrow. If I had a jury, a judge, the rules of modern evidence would be gone. You say, why are you so nasty, Professor Eisenman? I'm nasty because I think people have done unkind things with the material to detrimental effect, even to the effect into detrimental effect to someone like Jesus, forgetting someone like James. And the people who follow this are not even aware of it and care about Jesus. So we're actually doing a service to such people to try to, in fact, explain to them that their Jesus is not being treated with the dignity and the care and accuracy that they would require or that he would require. So it's not being cruel. It's the people who don't do this who are being cruel. Okay. So they were persuaded by him, line 40, and they beat them, and they said, don't speak, here's that name thing, don't speak in the name of Jesus.
Wait, what were his sons' names?
James and Simon. But in English, Jacob, and in Hebrew, Jacob and Shimon, I guess. But in English, James and Simon. Again, that may be where John and James, the two sons of Zebedee, come into play in the gospel. Probably that's where they get those two names from. The two thunder twins or brothers. That's probably where they get that particular pair from. Again, I can't prove any of that, but since you asked. Anyway, here we have the name again, line 40. And then line 41. So they left, hey, we're out of here, guys. And they suffered for his name, and they were, there we got the glue, daily in the temple and the houses preaching, so they were in the temple again. I ask you finally, if the early Christian community didn't care about the temple, why are they daily there? And what do they keep going back there for? Oh, they want to convert people? Okay, maybe that's it, but I think it's more than that. They care about the temple. I'm sure they did care about the temple. This movement, whatever it was very interested in the temple. It was like the scrolls, and it's extremely interested in the temple and the purity of that place. Chapter 6. This is a really important chapter because it introduces Stephen. Now, if you will recall from what I've said about the Pseudo-Clementine recognitions, that at this point in the discussions on the temple, the daily discussions on the Temple Mount, that the debates occur, and then the riot led by Saul, or at least the enemy, he's not identified as Saul per se, marginal notes in some collections identify him, but that's not a sufficient identification. The identification that I think is important is the fact that he gets letters from the high priest to pursue the early Christian community to Damascus, which is the presentation of Paul. So that's the basis of why it's a Paul character. At this point in the narrative there, Paul attacks James and throws him down the steps, leaves him for dead, and the community flees to the Jericho area according to that presentation. Here, rather, Stephen is introduced. And it's he who is attacked. Now, remember I told you about the exposing of oneself to the Jewish crowd of the Roman centurion at Passover time as being one of the episodes that's occurring around all these events here in the mid-40s, which, of course, this isn't supposed to be the mid-40s, but that's what's being referred to here. Well, the person who's beat outside the walls of Jerusalem by the Jewish mob in the wake of that is a servant from the emperor called Stephen, who was delivering goods and treasure from the emperor to his, he's one of these couriers who the Jewish crowd gets in the countryside and robs and beats. They don't kill him or anything, but they rob and beat him. So again, we have a parallel in Josephus from what we're getting, to some extent, presented here. Otherwise, the Stephen episode, I don't know who this person is, where he comes from, why he's here, but what finally emerges again is the meanness of the Jewish crowd and the suffering of Stephen at their hands. So this is a pro-Stephen episode. The Josephus, you could say, would be not anti-Stephen, but not, it's basically presenting what happened to someone called Stephen at the hands of a Jewish mob. So for the Gospels or the Book of Acts, this Stephen now is a Christian of some kind. And that's what's so confusing about this. So let's look it over, because the first one to say that this is being substituted for the attack on James was this scholar called Hans Joachim Scheps. And I totally agree. It's not my own idea. He was someone who wrote about so-called Jewish Christianity in the 1950s, 40s, 50s, 60s, that period there. And he originally suggested this. And I think he opened my eyes. So when you get an original scholar who does suggest things like this, it can really move you forward and help you. Because from that moment on, I began to understand that there were things being substituted for other things. And before he pointed this out, I would have never known it. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Because unless someone points it out to you, you don't know. You can never know. Your parents don't know it, your brothers and sisters don't know it, your girlfriends and boyfriends don't know it, your pastors don't even know it. But the minute someone points it out to you, then it's like here, your eyes are open. And then you look for other things of this kind to try to redress the presentation of it and get a balanced presentation if you can. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is the balanced presentation here. But this episode now, we've just seen the problem with Gamaliel. Let's look at the Stephen episode. Other disciples multiplied, again the glue, and there was murmuring now. Now this is really interesting. There were Grecian Jews against the Hebrews. Well, that's not what the Greek text says. Now you may have a different translation, The Hellenists against the Hebrews is what is normally presented. Mine is a bad translation. And that's what the Greek says, Helleniston. I like to use a parallel Greek text if we can. So there are Hellenists, Helleniston, against Hebreus, against Hebrews. What are they talking about? Who are the Hellenists and who are the Hebrews? In this short period, 5 or 10 years, we're getting these. So the only thing you can conclude is that people of Greek origin are angry at people of Jewish origin. That's what seems to be said here. Is that all right? You all agree on that? Well, that's not what's going on, as it turns out. So let's just look. But that's what it looks like is going on. And it's because their widows were being overlooked in the daily service or administration, or whatever that means. The point is that we're going to get deacons appointed here. Now, the word service and administration in Greek is diakonin. So it's all based on the same word. So the deacons, as we say in English, are going to be appointed in place of the apostles. That's the presentation of this episode, how we're going to get a diakon in. My Greek isn't as good as some of your Greeks here, but in any case, appointed. So let's see how this is going to be presented. There's something, service going on in a daily manner. And the 12, presumably the apostles, calling the company of the disciples, who are now being distinguished from the 12, the Gospels, they get mixed together. The point being that the disciples are now presented as different from the apostles. Here's the discussion that's presented in chapter 9:2. It's not right for us to leave the word of God that we should serve tables. Again, diakonin again. So it's all about serving of some kind. But basically it's put on the level that the Hebrews are uppity, that the Hebrew apostles are snobbish and don't want to do any work. So we got to get some lower Greek types to do all the work. That's basically what the thrust is here of what the writer, you see that the writer is on the side to some extent of the Greek idea. And I think that is true. This is written in Greek and I think it is a pro-Hellenistic book. But it's even presenting the apostles a little bit badly here. They just want to study the Word of God all the time. They don't want to do anything. So we got to get some people who will wait on the tables. So the brothers found 7 men from among them, full of the Holy Spirit, who they would then appoint to deal with this, while we give ourselves continually, that is the apostles, again, to the ministry of the word, again, diakonia. So we get this diakonia, this service thing repeated over and over again in this, whatever is trying to be implied by that. So, they chose, one of the men chosen was Stephen, a man full of faith and the Holy Spirit. That means he's a Pauline person, obviously, since he's full of faith. He's not works of the law person. And all these people now have Greek names. Stephen, Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmen. Well, Timon and Parmenides are the name of 2 of Plato's dialogues. The Timaeus and the Parmenides. And I'm sure that's where they got those 2 names. And Nicholas, a convert from Antioch. I think that's what's being said here. Here I think it's Nicanor I have. Oh no, Nicanor, and then Nicanor was the person that in the Talmud gave the temple doors, in fact. Nicholas, a proselyte of Antioch. So these are supposed to be converts or Hellenists, Greco-type people who are involved in this movement. And Stephen is one of these people. So now the persecution of Stephen is, of course, going to be the persecution of Greco-Hellenistic people by the Hebrews. So since Stephen is really the archetypical Gentile convert, and in fact, Paul says, I think it's in Corinthians, that his first convert on the Greek mainland was Stephen. So we can take Stephen as a kind of archetypical Gentile convert. Here, I think it's here, 1 Corinthians line 16. And I also baptized the house of Stephanas. But I think there's another reference to him. Again, I'm not sure where I got the first convert. He calls him the first fruit someplace of Achaia. I don't know if I can find it here. I've got a Kleenex. I seem to be getting a bit of a running nose for some reason that I didn't start the day with. I can't find it off. Oh, here it is. The end of 1 Corinthians. But I beg you, brothers, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Just give me 2, it might help. You got extra ones. One may be a little bit too optimistic. Line 1 Corinthians 16:5. But I beg you, brothers, you know the house of Stephanas, that is the first fruit of Achaia, devoted themselves, and there it is, to the ministry of the saints, diakonion. They were the people taking care of the saints in the Greek mainland. That's where they get this from. That's where this is all from. The diakonin is the key to, sorting out. And I have it in great detail in my forthcoming book, more about this word, which is also used by Jesus at some point repetitively, and I can't remember offhand the episode. So I rejoice at the coming of Stephanas. Oh, well, it's a Pauline character. He's inserted here as going to be killed by Jews, mixing that with the Josephus. But the only thing that really happens here in the history of the early church is that James is attacked by Paul. That's, to my mind, according to Sheps, what really happens, what's really happening here. And this is all an anti-Semitic substitution. So how do you know? Well, let's get on with it, and we'll see what we make of this. In any case, so Stephanas is one of these 7. And okay, that's the end of that one. Line 7, a great multitude of priests came over and were obedient to the faith. So suddenly we get conversion of a lot of priests to Christianity. So many people converting that there shouldn't be any problem with hostile assemblies. Now we have a great number of priests. Anyway, forget all that. Back to Stephen. The narrative has introduced Stephen, which it never did James. As if Stephen is important, but James is not. Stephen is important because he's someone Jews persecute according to this presentation. James is unimportant because he's a philo-Jew and he's someone who cares about the Mosaic Law. So we don't bother introducing him. Anything we can do, as Josephus put it in the beginning of the Jewish War, to how does he put it? When he's talking about the defect in history writing of his time, vilify the Jews and
Flattery of the Romans.
Flatter the Romans. Anything he can do to vilify the Jews and flatter the Romans, that's the order of the day. Sorry to say that. Any Christian minister who wants to, or a rabbi who wants to take issue with me is welcome to do so. Okay, let's get on with Stephen here. Full of faith, power, work, great wonders. Now Stephen's running around making miracles, etc. to everybody. And there's now certain ones, usually the sum, certain ones, line 9, is the sum from James, the certain ones from James. Sum is usually is a usage relating to enemies of the writer. And they're from a synagogue called the Free Ones, the Libertines. And there were Cyrenians, Alexandrians. Cyrenians is North Africa, Libya. Alexandrian, Cairo. Cilicians, Asia Minor. They're all now, it's supposedly debating, attacking Stephen. Now, these are the Hellenists now. They're attacking the person who's the archetypal. It's not making any sense, any of it. But they were not able to resist. Then secretly urged men on, saying, we've heard him speaking words, blaspheming Moses. Okay, here's the blaspheming charge against James that we get in the execution of James later on. Now it's Stephen blaspheming Moses. Why would Stephen be blaspheming Moses? What's he got to do with Moses at all? So these people, somebody, whether it's these Alexandrians or the certain ones or the some, are stirring up the people. So everyone, the people, the Sanhedrin, the priests, they're all together on the same side according to this narrative. Well, that's not the way the situation was in Palestine at that time. People were fighting the high priest, fighting the Herodians, and so on. So the attitude of this is so, who would write this? Someone overseas who didn't know anything about the historical situation and didn't really care. To my mind, it's someone in Alexandria. There we have a great record of Greco-Roman anti-Semitism coming out of Alexandria. Philo's mission to Gaius is written against such people who go to the Roman emperor and complain about the Jews in Alexandria and want the emperor to withdraw the privileges, in fact execute them all if he will. And Josephus and Philo even named some of these people, who they were. I can't remember who their names, but there's someone called Appian and a few other people who went to the emperor in Rome to do this kind of propaganda that Philo goes, and Philo's no tremendous nationalism. He goes and tries to defend it, stop this from happening. So to my mind, it's circles like that that produce this material. People who are really got a thing about the situation in the Middle East. It would be like having the PLO write the history of Zionism or something. Well, that's a very good parallel, actually. Anyway, or some of these other propagandists you hear on radio or TV who are describing, why the Jews have to be put in their place and why Israel is the cause of all trouble in the universe. And they set up false witnesses saying that he blasphemes this holy place and the law. Well, that's what Paul is accused of doing, so this is a Paul-type person. Paul does do things of that kind, but the real blasphemy charge is against James. So I'm going to mark this blasphemy, and Josephus makes that clear, but I think the reason James is accused of that is going in the inner sanctum of the temple, as I told you, pronouncing the forbidden name of God, which is what the blasphemy charge in the Talmud is based on. But I don't think the people were against James. In fact, as we get the early church text showing it, that he was a very popular leader, and I don't know. This Stephen character is sort of a Paul type of a person that would be treated the way Paul, according to the problems Paul runs into. Anyway, we now get Stephen speaking before the Sanhedrin. Why a convert from overseas who's a nobody would be called before the Jewish Sanhedrin and allowed to make a big speech is beyond my comprehension. It's totally unrealistic, and this is probably an attempt to present the trial of James before the Sanhedrin, which we know occurred. So I think Sheps is right, and what the author here has done is actually compress two things. The attack on James and the trial of James into one episode and putting it under the name of the Pauline archetypical convert Stephen, also the person beaten by Jewish crowds that we know, but not because he was a Christian, but because he was the emperor's messenger bringing treasure and other things. He may have been a secret Christian because he was coming from Corinth, where the emperor was holed up a lot of the time, and probably Corinth was a stronghold, as we know. That's why Paul's writing several letters to the Corinthians of Pauline ideology. So this guy might have been he may have been someone who was a Christian. And remember, I told you that several generations later, or at least one generation later, a man called Stephen is responsible for the assassination of Domitian, probably in return for Domitian's persecution of Christians. And Domitian's execution of Flavia Domitilla's husband or father, Flavius Clemens. And Flavius Clemens is, I think, our Clement, under whose name, as I told you, the Suit Clementines is written. And the reason that he assassinates Domitian is because of all these Christians, including Domitilla, who one of the most important Christian catacombs in Rome is named after, because it was done on her property, in return for what Domitian did to people like that. And I think also, because Domitian executed Epaphroditus, who I told you about. I have a picture of Epaphroditus in my James book, and if you look in Josephus and elsewhere, you'll find out that Epaphroditus is Nero's secretary for Greek letters and the person that Josephus dedicates all his works to. Now, Epaphroditus, as I don't have the, oh, here it is. Here. Epaphroditus is also, as I told you, someone that Paul is very close to in Philippians, and someone that Paul says he sends to the imperial family or household as a messenger and so on. So I don't think that there would be two people called Epaphroditus in the imperial household at this time. Never mind. That's just my own point. But it could be his son that we're talking about, who may have had the same name. I don't know. But let's look at what happens with Stephen here. So now Stephen is before the Sanhedrin, and he gives a speech. Men, brothers, fathers, listen to the glory of God appeared to our father Abraham. Well, Abraham is not Stephen's father. He wouldn't be giving this speech because Stephen is clearly a Gentile convert, an archetypical convert. He's not a native-born Jewish person. He's a Hellenist at least. And what does a Hellenist mean? I have no idea. Anyway, he gives this long speech. Well, until you get to the error that he makes in this speech, you don't know where the speech may have come from. But the moment you come to the error, then you know where it came from. Errors often tell you where something comes from, just like I can tell you where the speech in... So we're beginning to unravel the working method of the author of Acts, I think. And I think I have done that in my work, probably one of the only ones to have ever done that in a fairly systematic way. I hope others may have been able to do it, but I think I have done it fairly well. And here we come to the error. Well, this is pretty straightforward history here until you get to line 16. And to know that this is an error, you have to know your biblical history. Now, most of you probably don't know your history well enough, and I'm sure your churches and other people you are familiar with don't know it well enough to have even bothered about this, so it wouldn't upset them. But I know Jews, and if you make a little error like this, they'll laugh you out of the room. They would start squawking and yelling. If I did this at a conference, I know I've done little mistakes of this kind occasionally, and I get like totally like butchered. So if you made this mistake in front of the Sanhedrin, you'd be gone. You'd be like, they'd be laughing and roaring and heaping abuse on you and so on. What's the mistake? Jacob went down to Egypt and died. And he and our fathers, this is a part of the Joseph and Jacob and the forefathers and so on. And it's about Abraham's tomb at Machpelah, if you know where that is, in Hebron, where the tomb of the patriarchs is. There's a lot of material if you've read Genesis about that. How many are familiar with Abraham's tomb at Machpelah? It's in the book of Genesis. You'll have to read Genesis. It's not a big, long book. I mean, it's worthwhile reading if you're going to study this history of this period. And they were carried away to Shechem and were laid at the tomb which Abraham bought for a sum of money from the sons of Amor from Shechem. The only problem is that Abraham did not buy the tomb from the sons of Amor at Shechem. He bought the tomb from at Hebron at Machpelah, and that is where the ancestors died, but were buried. But that tells you immediately, if you go look this up in the Old Testament, where this notice is. It's in Joshua 24, the end of the book of Joshua. And then if you look carefully at what this speech is, it's Joshua's farewell speech to the Hebrew people at Shechem. And at the end of that, it talks about how he refers to the fact that Jacob was buried in the tomb, or is it Joseph? Who's got a Bible here? Let's get it. I usually have my own Bible with me, but I don't have it here. Who's got a Bible? Anyone here I can borrow? Oh, thank you. Let's look at it. Let's take a look. Let's see what. Let's be detectives. Okay, here we go. Joshua. Let me see. I usually have it marked so I can find it quickly. So Joshua 24, at the very end of the book. Then Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel together, and he started speaking to them. Thus saith the Lord God, your fathers, including Terah, the father of Abraham, the father of Nahab, dwelt on the other side of the river. Anyway, you can follow this whole speech so that he retraces the whole history of the Jewish people in chapter 24. And he traces the whole thing. And then at the end of this, line 32, after this whole speech is over, Joshua the son of Nun died, being 110 years old. They buried him in the border of Timnath-Serah and Ephraim. And Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua and all he had done for them. And the bones of Joseph, which the children of Israel had brought up out of Egypt with them, they buried in Shechem, in the plot of ground which Jacob had bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of silver, and the inheritance of the children of Joseph. So, he has confused the tomb that Abraham bought with the tomb that Jacob bought, and the place where Abraham bought it is in Hebron in the south at Machpelah, with the place where Jacob bought it in the north at Shechem, which is the present-day city of Damascus. And it's once again one of those quickie mistakes. He's lifted this speech basically from Joshua's speech, and he saw all this material at the end here quickly, and he didn't absorb it that quickly. It wasn't working directly, let us say, word for word, or someone was reading it to the writer or whatever, and he picked up this thing, and in his mind it was saying that Abraham bought. He was confusing it with the earlier tomb that Abraham bought. And so actually this is this is the tomb of Joseph. This is not the tomb of the ancestors, which is in Machpelah and Hebron. This is the tomb of Joseph. Now, if you'd made this is a minor error, I admit, but if you'd made that mistake in front of the Sanhedrin, they'd have just broken out with, you're wrong, they'd have started shrieking and screaming at him. And the point is that gives us the clue where I wouldn't have known he got the speech from there too if I hadn't seen the error. Then when I went and checked up on the error, when I went and checked up on whose tomb this was and so on, and where the notice was, I saw the whole speech. And I realized that the author had taken basically the speech from there and made the error in a too hasty recording of this material. And you may not agree with me, that's my explanation. Otherwise, it's just wrong. It's just wrong. And so you have it whichever way you want. And anyway, why do the Sanhedrin people need a lecture from Stephen, a Gentile convert, on their history? I mean, again, it's the writer, like you're saying, customary in Greek literature, putting a speech into Stephen's mouth, and it's all here in the book of Joshua, including the tomb. But the tomb in Shechem is what Jacob bought from the sons of Hamor. He has that, but he has Abraham buying it from the sons of Hamor. And if you look at the Bible, Abraham has nothing to do with the sons of Hamor in the Bible. It's Jacob that has to do. Well, not just that, the whole story. So the guy's totally confused. Oh, well, that's just a mistake Stephen made. And no, because the speech too is out of Joshua 24, basically. So sorry about that, using your Bible like that. But so here's a speech that basically I think is totally. We can see the source of it. So finally, we get to the end of the speech, 45. And our fathers, again, it's not Stephen's fathers, that's for sure. There's no Jew called Stephen at this time. These are Greco-Hellenist people who found favor before God. Solomon built him a house, and the Most High did not live in man-made buildings. And as he said, heaven is my throne, the earth a footstool for my feet. Favorite passage that is constantly being, we already have had that previously in Acts, when I think Luke is talking about Jesus' assumption into heaven. He speaks about the footstool image. Then finally, Stephen attacks them. Oh, you stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears. That's the allusion in Ezekiel. I will not let people uncircumcised in body and or heart into the temple. So he's rephrased it here. Uncircumcised in heart and ears. Why do you always resist the Holy Spirit? So he's badgering the Sanhedrin, in your fathers so, and here we get the Paul accusation in 1 Thessalonians. Which one of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? And they killed the ones who prophesied the coming of the righteous one. That's pretty accurate in the sense that Jesus would have been called the righteous one, of whom you now have become the betrayers and murderers. So again, it's a Peter-like speech. You're not going to get very far in the Sanhedrin and calling them murderers and everything. But in any case, it's the blood libel accusation again but it includes the killing all the prophets. We first encountered that in 1 Thessalonians 2:15. And who picks that up in history? Muhammad loves that. That's all through the Quran. That produces a huge dose of anti-Semitism in the Quran. The Jews are always identified as the people who killed all the prophets. No, the Jews didn't kill all the prophets. The Jews gave the world the prophets. It's just a slur. It may have to do with the Jesus and John presentation that they're supposed to be involved in that situation in some way, which is not clear because John, as we know, was killed by an Herodian king, and Jesus, the jury is still out on lots of aspects, but the Romans are certainly involved in that. So but that's what it's relating to. But let's go back in history then. I always like to ask people, okay, name one prophet that the Jews killed. Well, what? See, all these are slogans that produce hatred. Hatred in Islam, hatred in Christianity. And you say, well, why is it offensive? Because I think it's shameful that this is allowed to go on generation after generation, century after century, and nobody who's supposed to be righteous and care about these things stands up and protests. Have I ever heard a minister protest about these things? Have I ever heard an Islamic imam protest about these things? And what, I have to do it at Cal State Long Beach in my little class of 10 people? It's shocking. You name one. They didn't kill Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. They didn't kill Joseph. These are prophets. Muslims call all these people prophets. These are not really prophets. Let's get on to the real prophets. They didn't kill Moses. They didn't kill Aaron. They didn't kill Nathan. They didn't kill Samuel. They didn't kill Elijah. In fact, he had trouble with foreign kings. They didn't kill Elisha. Wait, I'm trying to find one. Isaiah. They didn't kill Isaiah. They didn't kill Jeremiah. They didn't kill Ezekiel. They didn't kill Amos. They didn't kill Micah. They didn't kill Hosea. Where are all the prophets that the Jews killed? Name one. In fact, there are just the opposite. They hardly ever killed a single one. If maybe someone could mention Zechariah, it's a possibility that somebody was responsible. I don't know if the Jews are responsible, like saying the Americans killed Kennedy. The Americans, like when people who hate America in the Middle East or some foreign nation, you Americans, you kill all your presidents. Well, how many Americans would like that accusation thrown at them? What, we killed Lincoln? What, we killed Kennedy? You like that being said to you like that? And yet people do say that about Americans, so you know the source. It's a hostile person full of hatred and venom. I don't know where we got it from Paul. Where he got it from Paul. Paul is full of venom and invective. I mean, I don't know why he feels the way he feels. He's being persecuted, he thinks, so he throws this stuff out in moments of anger. Well, you talk to any Muslim anywhere in the world, that's the first thing they say about, you Jews who killed all the prophets. And they get it from this. This is Muhammad, has picked it up from half-baked reading of this material. And so this is how libels just go and go and go and go and go and go. So, I always try to point out, name one besides the Jesus-John matter, which is really what they're implying here. But aside from the Jesus-John issue, and obviously they didn't kill John, he was killed because he was a popular leader by the authorities. Jesus, I would assume, if we can identify him in any real way, is the same. So let's put them aside, even though that's what it's about. So where are they? And now you've killed the just one, whom you have become the murderers and betrayers. And you who received the law through angels do not keep it. As if Stephen is going to keep it? Anyway, so they all cried out with a loud voice, In any case, before that, Stephen has a vision. And hearing these things, they were cut to the hearts, they gnashed their teeth at him. Again, the Jews are portrayed full of venom and invective. And Stephen, who's saying these horrible things to them, is full of the Holy Spirit, looked up into heaven, he sees the glory of God, and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. Oh, well, that's the vision James has. So this immediately identifies where they took this from. The early church sources, you remember, Eusebius and everything, when James is about to be thrown down in the temple, he sees, and you will see the Son of Man in heaven coming on the clouds of heaven. He sees Jesus up in the clouds, standing at the right hand of God. This is exactly the vision that James has. And he cried, look, I see the heavens opening and the Son of Man standing on the right hand of God. And that is the James vision, basically, at the time of his end, according to early church sources. And crying out with a loud voice, and you'll see in that thing, if you look at that material in Eusebius from Eusebius, this is how they're put. And the crowds, they cry out with a loud voice, oh, just one whom we all must obey. And you'll see that is repeated over and over again and again. And bowing down, he cried out with a loud voice, repeated twice. You look at that and you'll see that's the exact language used in the Eusebius presentation of the death of James. And throwing him outside of the city, they stoned him, and the witnesses laid their clothes at the feet of a young man named Saul. And bowing down, he cried out with a loud voice, Lord, do not lay this sin against them. Well, that's how James's death is portrayed in the church sources. That he says, forgive them, they know not what they do, or whatever. You remember that passage. So again, I haven't proved anything, but I say to you this, I think Sheps is dead right. This is all lifted from the death of James, combined with the other Stephen material, combined with the Joshua material, and you can get I think you can get a very good idea of the working method. But before we go home, let's look at one last point here. Look at this here. And the witnesses laid their clothes at the feet of a young man named Saul. What do you mean? Nobody who reads this ever questions this. Why are the witnesses laying their clothes at the feet of a young man named Saul? The witnesses don't lay their clothes at the feet of anybody. It's the man who is stoned in rabbinic literature, who is stoned naked, and his clothes are taken off, and his are the clothes that are taken away. So once again, the authors have totally garbled the stoning material from the way the stoning was done. It's not the witnesses who take off their clothes, it's the stoned man who is stripped of his clothes.
There's a possibility that you want to take your jacket off?
No. Okay, look, anyway, any possibility could work, but the point is, once again, these writers are using historical material, either garbling it or changing it or revamping it according to their own lights. Again, if you want to interpret it like that, fine. So they took their clothes off for stoning, but that isn't what they did. They didn't take their clothes off. The whole crowd doesn't take their clothes off. They're going to stone someone. They're all taking their clothes off. It's the man who is stoned whose clothes is taken off. Again, I don't know what this means, but if you look at the of the account we have in the early church fathers of the death of James in Eusebius, one man protests against what is done. A band of the priests of Rechab asks them to stop doing this, and so Saul here takes the place of that person in that narrative. And in Jerome, actually, it isn't a priest of the Rechabites who protests against what's being done. It's Simeon Bar Cleophas, who is the witness who is standing aside, who asked the people to stop. In any case, Acts uses this now to introduce us to Paul. And of course, in the Pseudo-Clementines, Paul is introduced as the man who attacks James at this moment. So all these narratives come together, and you're going to have to decide what the actual historical truth is. I think I'm prejudiced, obviously, but I'm prejudiced with an attempt to try to sort it out historically. I think that my reconstruction is a fairly credible one. If you feel that it would be a better one, I hope you can do a better job. If you like this narrative, stick to this one. I have no idea. I don't have any idea what this is supposed to mean.
Do you have one, Joe?
you condemn people on the basis of witnesses, obviously.
Yeah,
But,
but